Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Today, my guest is Jim Cavale. Jim is the founder and chairman of athletes.org. Athletes.org serves as a players association for college athletes. It is dedicated to maximizing their income, amplifying their voices, and providing on-demand support for key decisions as they navigate college athletics and beyond. Athletes.org, or AO, enables college athletes to have a say in crucial matters affecting their future. What precipitated this conversation was a document issued by the American Council on Education. This document was written in support of Dartmouth College's position that athletes not be allowed to unionize on their campus. The ACE provided a statement to Congress in support of that particular emphasis, and I wanted to have a conversation about that with Jim to talk about it from the athlete's point of view. Jim and I talked directly about the issues higher education is most fearful of: athlete organizing and collective bargaining. In our conversation, Jim stresses the need for dialogue and collaboration with the athletes to resolve issues. If college athletics intends to restructure, it must focus on maximizing revenue and ensuring equitably sharing across programs. We also discuss what private equity brings to the table, offering an initial boost with potentially injecting millions into athletics departments. Jim also stresses in this piece fair opportunities and the regionalization of sports to optimize resources and minimize sports being dropped. It's a great conversation. Hey, Jim, I'm so glad you could join me on the podcast. How you doing today?
Doing great. It's Final Four time. It's Masters time. I mean, it's a great time of year. Seasons are changing, and it's always opportunistic to be able to have a conversation with somebody like yourself.
Well, I'm so glad you could join me. One of the things that was started off our conversation a couple of weeks ago was this document that came out of the House hearing regarding whether student athletes are employees. This is a reaction to the Dartmouth unionization attempts. And this document came from the American Council on Education. And for my listeners, I'll put a link to it in my show notes. But it was a very interesting document that I shared with you that sort of talks about maintaining the status quo is the best for everybody. I'm going to read just a paragraph from this one document. It says the administrative costs and burdens of paying student athletes would be substantial. Institutions would have to establish additional systems to track student athletes' work hours and time off to ensure they are paying minimum wage and overtime. Schools would also need to engage attorneys, especially in state labor and tax laws, to comply with the laws of not only their own state, but all those states in which their employees would travel with their teams for competitions. Jim, you have thought a lot about this space. Tell me your reaction to this argument.
Well, my reaction is we're trying to solve a complex set of problems for too wide of a range of schools, stakeholders, athletes, sports, etc. And really, that's been the paralyzing problem for leaders in college athletics all along. Is we're thinking about 3 divisions, we're thinking about 1,000+ sports, we're thinking, or 1,000+ schools, we're thinking about 40+ sports and 500,000 student athletes. And there's just no way that you can please everyone, let alone solve all of the different problems that everyone has. The reality is there's a $16 billion elephant in the room. And the $16 billion elephant in the room is mainly created by football athletes and some men's and women's basketball athletes. And the House case is a perfect way to see that if you study it, because the 4.2 billion in damages that Claudia Wilkin, talked about were associated with what classes? Football, men's basketball, women's basketball, power conferences. So you're talking about a very small percentage, a few points of the whole pie that is really involved in this situation around revenue and the allocation of it and how they should be able to receive it, whether it's through employment or whether it's through other manners like NIL group licensing. And the reality is, if we could solve the problem for the few percent of athletes and schools and teams in these sports at this level who create almost all of the $16 billion a year that is generated, if we could solve the problems for them, we could still protect everyone else to have the same, if not better, experience in college athletics across all divisions and all sports, preserve Title IX. We could do it all, but we've got to solve the problem for the $16 billion elephant in the room.
So let me continue with another paragraph from this same page. For all colleges and universities, this disintegration of intercollegiate athletics would rob a substantial portion of their students of what participating on an intercollegiate athletic team contributes to their education. Unlike professional sports, whose primary purpose is to generate profits for their owners, the vast majority of intercollegiate athletics teams are sustained by their schools because of the belief that the teams provide students with valuable opportunities outside the classroom. I'm not even sure that's a fair statement that the opportunities are sustained by their schools, because we do count on outside revenues in many of these Division I programs, because that's what athletic directors are charged with doing, is fundraising. Is that a fair statement today?
I think that the once again, the reality is it's a generalized statement about college athletics without delineating the difference between football, men's basketball, women's basketball, in some cases, maybe even women's volleyball, softball, baseball. Like, there's a few sports at a certain level that are very commercialized. It is a business. To say it's not a business would make anyone blush. And you don't need to look any further than the demise of the Pac-12 and the fact that the commercial opportunities with media revenue in the Big Ten were enough for UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington to jump ship. And so if those types of decisions are being made, let alone the public coach salaries and severance situations that we've seen, there's no doubt that college sports in those realms, those few sports and those certain level of schools, has been commercialized. And so that commercial part of college athletics needs to really have a new deal put together for it. And if you want to protect all of the other athletes that play other sports and play at schools that is part of the, let's say, non-commercial portion of college athletics, the best way to protect them is to figure out how to solve the $16 billion elephant in the room for the football, men's and women's basketball athletes at those power conference schools that have commercialized themselves, because then that becomes an asset to get protection for the rest to have a really, really wonderful collegiate athletics experience with standards and benefits that probably will be improved and set to a certain bar per the NCAA's Transformation Committee report. But they won't have the same exact situation as a football athlete who's a part of one of these power conference level schools that's been commercialized.
So let's take the Dartmouth argument for a second. What the regional director said in her decision was, this is about control and paid professional coaches. So if we separate out, let's say we can solve a problem for those elite sports that are commercialized. We still have the problem of control and paid professional coaches in every other aspect of college athletics. So whether they have money or not, those two things seem to be the issue. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that every decision that is being made right now, from presidents down through the NCAA committees and councils and board of governors, down through the commissioners at the conference level and their deputy commissioners, down through athletic directors, staff members, coaches, and staff members. Okay. All of these decisions that are being made without the college athlete agreeing to whatever is being decided, agreeing to the right amount of hours per week that they should spend on their sport, agreeing to the academic standards that should merit a reward like the Alston check, agreeing to, they're not agreeing to anything. Okay. And so if you can do a deal with the athletes, both the commercial athletes who produce revenue and would not only have a standard in every benefits category, but also would be able to share in revenue. You have to do a deal with the commercial athletes, but you also have to do a deal with the athletes at Dartmouth down through athletes at a D2 or D3 school in all sports. They need to be able to vote and agree on the terms of their whole situation. Yeah. That may include them agreeing to not be employees because they grasp and understand certain things that make them decide to vote in that manner. It also may include them voting, to be employees for certain reasons, but they need to do a deal. If you want protection, if you want a safe harbor, if you want to stop litigation, if you want to stay out of court, I'm talking to presidents, I'm talking to trustees, I'm talking to all the leaders. The only way to do it is to do a deal with the athletes, because that is an asset for you to ask for help. But Congress is never going to help you without that asset, because all you're doing is continuing to make decisions for young people in their situation at your school without them being involved.
Yeah, this is one of the core things that has kind of driven me crazy for the last, 30 years. We have this paternalistic mindset in athletics where the coach knows best. Even when the coach is recruiting the son or daughter of a family, don't worry, I'll take care of you. It's my job to take care of you. I think we have a bit of that still in higher education where you're bringing your child to campus and we will take care of them, help them with this transition. I don't think we realize how fast these young men and women are growing up and what they're exposed to that may allow them to make reasonable decisions for their own welfare. How can colleges, college presidents and trustees maybe reimagine this idea of being so paternalistic?
It's a great question. And all of us, when I say us, I mean older folks, we have this way of looking at our younger selves in the existing 18 to 22, 18 to 24, maybe with a COVID year or two, college athletes. But when you are fortunate, like I have been with my business at Influencer and now with athletes.org, to interact with athletes and be around them, not just like the leaders and coaches at these institutions are, but also in a way where I'm talking to them about brand building. I'm talking to them about making good financial decisions. I'm talking to them about NIL deals. I am blown away by the muscles that they're learning to work when it comes to networking, selling themselves as a brand ambassador, building a brand on social media, coming up with businesses, investing money into startups and other opportunities. It's amazing. And it's unlike anything I would have ever been able to do when I was that age. Yeah. So the evolution of the college athlete is being sped up into adulthood because of NIL. And of course, now NIL is down in high school. Yeah. So everybody's thinking different. And it's going to change sports. It's going to change the role of an agent. It's going to change the role of a financial advisor. It's going to change the roles of front offices at the pro level. It's going to change college athletics departments. Yeah. And so we have to realize that these are actually sophisticated young people who are going into adulthood, but in most cases, these folks are working 50-hour weeks. Yeah. Okay. And in some cases, they're working 50-hour weeks to generate a $16 billion industry of annual revenue. And they have no NLRB rights like anyone else who works 50 hours a week would have, because they produce that kind of revenue. And tying it to D3 and high schools and Dartmouth and all these other things is not apples to apples. While those other divisions and Dartmouth and the Ivy Leagues and these other sports that are part of the non-commercial bucket also need to have their athletes agree to working 50 hours a week for a different set of terms. Mm-hmm. You can't get to the point where this is structured and you're protected from future litigation without putting the paternalistic mindset aside and looking at these young people as huge assets to the team that you're building at your university, their students and their athletes. And that's a big part of your school.
So let's take it one step further. Let's say I'm a list step president listening. I'm willing to accept that life is that the experiences of these 18 to 22-year-olds far surpass what they were when I was 18 to 22. How do I then overcome this idea that we traditionally moved our programs, our schools programs within a conference, and all the sports have had to go and do whatever the football team does? So you look at Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, they don't mind because football plays once a week, but soccer plays 2 or 3 times a week. Men's basketball 2 or 3 times a week. That is a heck of a lot of travel to go to Rutgers, to go to Penn State, to Ohio State on those athletes. How can I think about then separating out those two things? Do I need to create an entirely separate structure just for the elite level teams?
Yeah, I think if you delineate I'm going to keep using commercial versus non-commercial athletes. And obviously that delineation would happen within one campus, because even for those football and men's and women's basketball athletes at Washington, for instance, they're going to have different opportunities because of the revenue that they produce, because of the eyeballs on their sport, which is 100% objective. They're going to have different opportunities than the soccer or other programs that you named on that same campus. So the delineation will need to happen at the school level. The delineation will need to happen at the conference level. And if it happens, the ability to regionalize the other sports, to get a little bit back of what we just lost with the Pac-12 for those other sports, will become real, and will save costs on travel, will save hours spent by athletes in traveling that will be taken away from their academic and athletic hours that they want to be able to invest. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just logic. Like, for the athletes who are commercialized, they're going to be more apt to be okay doing what they have to do to play in the league against the teams in any city that are going to get the most eyeballs on it, because they're going to be sharing in it.
Yeah.
But like for Oregon to be playing Rutgers on a Wednesday night in soccer is obviously insane.
Even just going like the ACC has proposed having a neutral site in Dallas for Stanford and Cal to meet the ACT teams. Dallas is still a 2-hour flight. These are not quick trips by any stretch of the imagination.
No, they're not. And once again, like all of these, there's a long list of realities of how commercialized this small segment of college athletics is. And because of that commercialization, how much of the $16 billion it makes up annually. And those realities need to be faced and treated in a certain way and figured out, while also figuring out the rest of college athletics to create a better situation. And until we delineate and start working on the problem, I fear we're going to continue to hear a lot of generalizations like this statement from ACE, which is not considering what lives inside of all of the sample of all of these schools and athletes, which is a very commercialized small percentage that's creating all the revenue.
All right, so let's take it one step further. Let's say I'm in agreement. I need to have a breakaway group that makes the billions of dollars, and I have another group that's playing regionally. Do I have 2 separate administrative structures on campus?
Yeah, I mean, if you just kind of ride along with the articles that we've seen about a football super league, and you just envision that happening, whether it does or not, it's a good example to answer your question. And you separated football. And so football was, Auburn Football LLC, and Auburn owns X percent of Auburn football, but private equity also owns X percent. You could make an argument Auburn would want to own a minority percent because it would create less issues for them. But you also could make an argument they want to own a majority percent because they want control with, so we'll put that aside, but you separate football and that's what it looks like. And Auburn LLC, Auburn Football LLC is a part of a league of 60 teams, 2 tiers, 2 30-team leagues. Auburn's in tier 1, let's say. And ultimately those schools are all going to play each other now, which, by the way, if that happened, there's even more billions of dollars a year in media money because the ratings would be better and the games would be closer and the spreads would be single digits, unlike most college games. And you could have fantasy football, which means more fan engagement because there's less teams and you can't do fantasy football with 130 plus FBS teams, blah, blah, blah. So they'd make more money and they'd be in this league, and private equity would own part of the school's football IP and the school would own the other part. And you'd have a whole front office just dedicated on that separate commercialized IP from the athletic department, from the university, which is, by the way, something that you guys as presidents do a lot with medicine and technology on campuses. When you have a great academic program that produces great technology, there's a lot of ways that you've learned to monetize that IP. Same thing with putting together new medicine, right? So this is just a different set of IP that the university right now has within its grasp, but is commercializing more every day. So that is all how the commercial side would work. I think college athletics would look a little bit different. First of all, I don't think you'd have as many ADs, associate ADs and staff working in an athletic department as you do today. Jay Billis talked about that with me on my Now It's Legal podcast in our first episode that I did. He talked about, like, you're not going to have as many associate ADs in the future.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I think that's going to change. I think we're heavy in spending from a payroll standpoint with ADs, coaches, and staff in college athletics.
For sure.
And all you got to do is look at what a pro league rations for coaches and staff, and it's usually 10% or less of gross revenue.
Right.
And what college does, which is almost 40 to 50% of gross revenue goes to staff. Now the excuse is, well, some schools we have 30 sports. That's a lot of coaches. That's a lot of staff. I understand that, but we're still operating a little fat at the school level. And when you separate commercial from non-commercial, how you organize that staff is going to look different.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there's going to be a lot of mirroring of what NFL, NBA franchises do. They're just not top heavy in administration. They put their money into facilities and the athletes. That's where they go. All right, we're going to take it one more step now. Now that you've separated out that group, you definitely have the funding formula figured out, the staffing formula, the chance for new revenues, new engagement, private equity. How do we fund the other sports? How do we do that? I'm a college president. I'm going with you on this. How do we fund that group that's now going to play regionally, but might be 30 other sports?
Yeah, you have a balance sheet asset and you have a P&L asset for your athletic department. On the balance sheet, you own X percent of equity of your football program still. And if you ever resell it or whatever, like that's an asset that you can still monetize. And whatever that percent is, you also have that percent on the P&L with revenue sharing. And so now you have this profitable commercial football program, which is already commercial and profitable on all these campuses. It just lives inside of an athletic department that the rest of the sports are losing money, so it breaks even or just makes a little bit. But regardless, going back to it, you are going to have a rev share between the football program and your athletic department, and that's going to fund the other sports.
Okay, so the expectation will still be that enterprise funds the other 30 sports.
It has to be, but it has to be done in a way where A, you're able to create more revenue because you're in a league with all the best teams producing more media money. And B, it has to be done in a way where it's structured where you like the rev share and it works, the math works for you to be able to fund the other programs there's also the reality that if Auburn football did what I'm saying, let's just say Auburn football was $500 million valued. It might even be more than that, might be less than that. Let's just go with $500 million. Well, if private equity comes in and the right owner goes to Auburn and buys 50% or 49%, well, that's, $250 million now that you have as a cushion for your athletic department, in addition to having a rev share in an ongoing manner with a football program that's going to make more money.
Does the enterprise have control over the administrative structure and amount of expenses that the 30 sports have? Do they have the ability to dictate how they spend their money?
I think they have the ability to dictate how they spend their money, but now they have to look at this source of revenue from Auburn Football LLC, to keep using Auburn as an example. Auburn Athletics has to project their operating expenses and their budget off of, just like they do now, off of, well, here's what we're going to get from Auburn Football LLC based on last year's revenue and our rev share with them. Here's what we're going to get from donations. Here's what we're going to get from some of the revenue we make off of these other sports, right? And they're going to have to plan it. And there's going to be more accountability than there might be right now, where we just know, like, we got a couple $100 million coming in. Football makes about 135 of it. And, we're going to use that 135 to make all this work.
Last question. This could be a tough one. So let's think this one through a little bit. How does all of this affect the nonprofit status of the institution? Because that's a huge savings in terms of taxes, donations, back and forth. How do we do that?
Well, I think, that has to do a lot with the details of what it looks like for private equity to come in and, take your football program private, basically. Like, that is the structure of that, including how much equity the school still owns, has a lot to do with the answer to your question, which is how they preserve nonprofit status. Here's what I know. Title IX, eliminating sports, how schools could protect nonprofit status, whether or not athletes should be employees or not, how you can share revenue with football and basketball and women's basketball athletes, but not with the rest without violating, Title IX. All of that can be figured out. All of it. If people would get in a room and let their guards down and do a deal with the athletes that are a part of those respective situations. And that's what's been missing and continues to be missing in the equation of solving this.
Yeah. And that's the reason for our conversation today, is to hopefully catch people when they're just consuming information, thinking about things more deeply without any barriers or preferences, just to kind of consider where we are today. Jim, thank you so much for brainstorming with me. I mean, that's really what I wanted to do, and get people to think a little bit more forward thinking versus, it was good. It was great in the good old days. It's not the good old days anymore. We've really changed as an industry. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you having me, and I appreciate all those who were able to listen. And obviously, I'm happy to connect, like I am with you right now, in private or public, with anyone that wants to talk about this more. I think that's, as I said, what's missing is more conversations like this with all the stakeholders who are involved. Because if we do that, I am very, very, very sure that we will figure out an even greater future for college athletics.
Appreciate you. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.